Thank you.
There you go. So this part will be recorded too. So that way, for people who have not been able to join, they can see this later. So this is just, again, to recap what we talked about in the main room. So kind of throughout this whole project, we really have relied on these three principles related to how we converse and kind of communicate with each other, making sure that we're being transparent, we're being inclusive, and communicating in good faith. So we just want to, again, remind everyone this is where we all want to come from as we are contributing to the conversation. And then we can kind of jump in. So this first question is really to help us kind of understand all of you, where you're coming from, what you're most familiar with, to help kind of frame our conversation around where we might want to focus as we're starting to talk about our streets and our streetscape and our public spaces. So there is a link up here, and we can put that in the chat box as well. If you want to go to polev.com/site design, all one word, you can do that on your phone. You can do it on a computer screen. And then as different poll questions come up, they will pop up on your screen and you'll be able to participate. This one, you can just click on the map and can let us know kind of where you are most familiar with on the corridor. So we've got one right around Lawrence and Western, another one at Addison. So that's good. We haven't had anyone on the southern portion of the corridor yet. So to see we've got kind of a range all the way in between. Got one up at Devon, another one here at Lawrence and Western. Nice, Foster and Devon. Yeah, if you're unable to use the poll website, feel free to put your responses in the chat. We're going to be saving all of the chat information and incorporating that into the plan as well. So don't feel like you have to figure out technology. Sometimes it doesn't like to work with us. So feel free to put your stuff in the chat if you need to. All right, I think we've got most people in the room. Great. So this gives us a good idea of kind of where everyone's coming from, and we can kind of try to focus around some of those areas that you're most familiar with when we start thinking about ideas for the corridor. So as we reviewed in the last room, our kind of potential principles for the vision for Western in terms of our safe and attractive streets are really focused around these four ideas. So improving pedestrian comfort while accommodating Western's role as an arterial, knowing that we've heard that we want to create a vibrant public realm, we want to create a better experience for pedestrians, but we also have to acknowledge that Western has a role in the overall transportation system. So part of this project will be figuring out how to balance that and optimizing transit along the corridor, again, improving our bus connectivity, our bus stations, and then also maximizing our east-west bike routes. So making those connections, not just when you're in a bus or when you're in a car, but also when you're in a bike or on a bike. So our first question related to the principles is really which ones of these principles are most important to you in your community. So you can get on the poll everywhere and it'll give you the option to rank each of these four. And then we'll see everyone's responses in real time. That way we can start to kind of discuss maybe why one rose to the top versus the other. And again, feel free to add your comments in the chat or raise your hand if you have something to share about why you ranked it the way that you did. I have some responses for bikeways. We've definitely heard a lot in our previous community surveys about biking kind of within the vicinity of Western. All right, it looks like Ethan, you have your hand raised. So if there's something you want to share, feel free to unmute yourself and we can chat about it.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting that transit and buses are so high. I drive a lot around Western, but I also bike to run errands or go for a ride or something. And I've definitely noticed that when I'm in a car, I can count on Western being a continuous street from one end to the other, and I don't have anything to worry about. But if I wanted to bike, there's not a safe place to do it, or maybe the side streets aren't continuous, or I think it should be a given that if you're taking transit or you're biking, whatever mode you're using, there is a continuous route from top to bottom. So you never have to doubt, is this bike lane, is this route going to go as far as I need it to go? Is it going to dead end somewhere? And then I'm in a dangerous intersection or something. That's definitely things I'm thinking about, maybe even the kind of quality of the lane, if it's a protected lane or there's a neighborhood greenway on a side street, intersections with protection in them, that kind of stuff. So that's just stuff. It's interesting to see how high that ranked as well.
Yeah, I think it was, thanks for your comment. It's definitely interesting to hear kind of, your perspective as both a driver and then also a cyclist, that recognizing that those are two very different and distinct experiences depending on what mode of transportation that you are choosing to take that day. So thank you. That was very, well, definitely the good input that we want to consider moving forward with the plan. So Irene, it looks like you have a couple questions and comments. So you talked about a clean street and being able to bike safely. And then I think your question about what vibrant means, if you want to elaborate on that more, we can kind of have a discussion about that and share a little bit more about your thoughts.
I live here for many years, and I agree with the prior speaker said in terms of counting with, how do you say, Western being a good place or street to ride when you come home, but also the bike. I don't understand when I say vibrant. Is it bringing more noise? People keep saying about restaurants, buildings. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about improving school or safety, that part. So if vibrant means, my question is more restaurants and more noise or more traffic, is that vibrant?
Very good question. It's a very good question. I think we like to use a lot of adjectives when we describe things, but it's good to get into the details about what we really mean by that. And I think in this case, when we talk about vibrant, we are thinking about more people and more activity. And maybe that is more restaurants or different types of businesses. And yes, public life, kind of neighborhood life, having a place to go. And if you can think of a street or a place you really enjoy visiting, I think that's what we mean by vibrant, those types of activities and uses and businesses that you really like to visit. And I think part of creating that vibrancy is having a safe place to walk, a safe place to bike, somewhere that's easy to get to, and that's easy to navigate and kind of understand where you are. So I think that kind of describes a little bit more of what we mean by vibrant. Does that help to?
No, I understand, and I don't want to. I understand, thank you. But on the other hand, it contradicts the idea of air being clean unless you put a lot of trees, because I personally don't want that kind of vibrant. I want safer schools, lots of trees, but that's another topic. So thank you for clarifying.
Great. Yeah, those are all definitely good things to consider as well too. So great. So we'll move to the next question. If it'll switch for me. Oh, there we go. Okay. So when we're thinking about pedestrian comfort, and Irene, you kind of got to this a little bit when you're talking about trees and having a safer place to walk. Some of these items here might be options that we want to consider on Western. And so we have a question here where you can select any and all of the images, either trees, landscape areas, wide sidewalks that you'd like to see on Western. Got a lot A lot of votes so far for trees and more landscape areas and wider sidewalks. And then movable planters. Movable planters are always a way to kind of bring in some green and maybe some spaces where it's a little bit narrow, which I think as we talked about in the last meeting, we kind of have quite a few areas like that on Western. Those might be an option. Great. I think it looks like we're starting to get some changing votes around, but overwhelmingly the photo with kind of a wide sidewalk with some landscape and shade with the shade trees is kind of overwhelmingly the top vote. Great, so Casey, your note about bus shelter is always a good idea. I think bus shelters definitely help kind of encourage people to ride transit. And it's always good whenever it's obviously raining or inclement weather. So that's a good idea too. We'll definitely make a note of that as another amenity that would help increase pedestrian comfort. Does anyone want to say anything about why they selected the ones they did, or any place along Western that they could see these types of improvements? Joshua?
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't particularly excited by any or many of those, and I have to admit it's mainly because the thing that makes me comfortable is knowing I can cross the street. It's not about the street. Like if the street is safe to cross, it's the street I can feel comfortable walking next to, and that's the main point. So wide sidewalks are great. Buffers between me and the cars are great, but mainly are the cars slow enough that at the next intersection I cannot die.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. You probably noticed with one of the slides in the previous room, we had those halos around pedestrian fatality areas, or not fatality, but just crash areas. And so that kind of gets to your point of intersections needing more safety improvements, or areas where it's going to feel safer to cross the street. And Ethan, so it's a great feeling pedestrian corridor feels more separated. Great, yeah, that's a good observation about that photo. It does kind of make you feel like you're more distinct from where cars are traveling. So even if they may be a little bit faster, you're not right up against it. Great, that's a great comment, thank you. All right. Go to the next one. So speaking of safety, we're talking about having, intersections that are safe to cross, places that are safe to walk. We have 4 of a variety of different ideas that we could incorporate at different locations along Western to improve our pedestrian safety and that pedestrian experience. So curb extensions that really bring the curb out into the roadway and shrink the amount of space that it would take to cross the street. We've got signage and lighting that would help to kind of designate where pedestrians would cross. And so out of these improvements, you can select any and all of those that really kind of draw you in and seem like something you would want to see on Western.
I tried to light up also the light, but the light that didn't light up.
We'll make a note of that.
Yeah, B and A are great, but the light I think is good need to, but it didn't, I don't know if I'm doing it right.
Great, yeah, that's a good thing to note. So we'll make a note that you also selected the light as well, so we can include that. Great, so looks like basically all the way across the board, we want it to be safer. So all these improvements are good ideas. Then we said, so Casey, your comment Great. Yeah, that's a good point. That they don't need to be considered independent of transit, but they could work as bus stops as well. So if that was pavement instead of landscape, you could kind of do double duty for both our transit needs and our pedestrian needs. It's a good point. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes. So we can kind of think we've got about 2 more sections to cover. So I think the polls and the feedback that we've gotten so far has been really helpful. So we're kind of flipped to the next section, and maybe we'll kind of stop here to wrap up the pedestrian safety improvement section in case anyone has anything else that they'd like to add before we get into talking a little bit about bike routes. All right, so we've got Ethan and then Josh and then Casey. So we'll do Ethan, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure. I saw Josh was first, but I'll go super quick. The one thing that I've definitely noticed, because I live near a 4-lane road, which is Western, there's 2 lanes in each direction. It's very difficult to just put something like a refuge island when you have 2 lanes of traffic, because you're watching for 2 cars or 2 trucks or anything who might not be communicating with each other. One might stop, you start crossing, and another one doesn't see the person walking. Happens all the time. Lots of very dangerous situations. So just keep that in mind, that just building something in the middle of the street isn't necessarily going to lead to increased safety if you're not taking into account how drivers are viewing pedestrians who could be crossing the street. And I think Casey was talking about that earlier.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And yeah, and actually, Casey, would you like to speak on that at all?
Yeah, I think this is an adjacent point. Anything we can do to shrink the distance that folks need to walk. I know I have young children. I'm sure many folks, if you don't have them, you at least know them, and it's hard for them to get across a big street like Western. So anything you can do with a bump out, or the refuge islands in the middle, if you get stuck there, it's not ideal, but I'd rather have my 3-year-old there than standing in what we would call a suicide lane. Also, these are important for older folks. My father uses a cane. A lot of folks, when these street lights are programmed, they're programmed for a certain average walker, but I think we can all think of someone in our lives that is a little bit slower getting across the street, and we would have, more vibrancy in a gentle way if it's a welcoming street where an older person feels comfortable crossing the street, someone with kids feels comfortable pushing a stroller across the street, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Yeah, those are all very good points. Definitely wanting to think about how we can accommodate all ages and abilities of different residents and visitors to the corridor. So those are really helpful comments that we'll definitely make note of and keep considering as we move forward. And then, so thank you. And then we have Joshua.
Yeah, thank you. I think bouncing off of Casey's point and everything here, the best way to improve pedestrian safety is decreasing, right, the distance they have to cross, and decreasing travel speeds. And I think the thing that is being missed in this study, the thing we need to be discussing, is reducing the size of Western. I think it's a shame that we have a conversation saying the basis of the conversation is we have a 4-lane highway carved through our community. That's 1950s thinking, or 1970s thinking. Every other country has passed this. It's time that we were too. And yeah, we don't actually need this sort of road through our community. And the way, like, we're talking about, and I appreciate the conversation, but we're talking about nibbling around the edges. And you can only do so much with a highway. So give us a street that doesn't have that much traffic, and reduce the traffic by giving one of the lanes to transit. Reduce the traffic by giving one of the lanes to cyclists, and see the traffic reduced. Because the moment, as long as we give people a highway to cross the city, they'll do it.
Yes, all very, very good points. Thanks, Joshua. And actually with that, so we do have about 5 minutes left, but based on kind of where the conversation has been going, I am going to.
Sorry, can I just one
Oh,
second?
yep, go ahead, Irene. Yep.
No, I hear what Josh was saying. I think Josh, the last speaker, say, but a lot of the changes, narrowing the street, other things was done in Lawrence Street, and I had to pray to more than one God when I drive there because it is narrow. I'm glad about the bike. I drive the bike myself, but it becomes too congested. Friday afternoon, you have to commit, even if you don't believe in God, talk with somebody up there. So I'm a little bit afraid of, how do you say, making Western too narrow. It will increase the anger of the city and maybe the murders. And I'm not being sarcastic. It's a very important artery. So I don't know. I mean, that's just wanted to say.
Yeah, exactly. I think those are all very good and valid points as well. As we talked about, in the previous presentation, and as we talked about with the principles, it is a very delicate balancing act. The Western serves a different role for different users. And we're, as the planning team with CDOT, with DPD, are looking at the best ways we can improve pedestrian safety and bike safety and transit, but then also understand that it has a role that does play an important part of not just transportation, but also kind of the economic role of moving freight and things like that. So I think all of those comments are very, very helpful, and we'll definitely keep those into consideration within the plan.
Cassandra, just a quick time check. We have a little less than 2 minutes to wrap up the session. I don't want anyone to get cut in the middle, so just that.
Great, thanks, Paula. Great, so with that, I think maybe we can talk a little bit in the last couple minutes. So I have this poll up on the screen. So kind of talking about improving transit and really wanting to understand your appetite for removing some of the on-street parking. And it looks like right now we have an overwhelming yes. Don't be afraid to say no or yes but only in limited locations. We definitely want your feedback on this. And there's no wrong answer. This is all just what we're going to be considering when we think about the plan. And Joshua, got about 1 minute left. So
I think we don't remove on-street parking, we remove traffic lanes. That's what every city does. Because parking, sure, parking's fine, but removing parking makes a difference, but that's gonna piss people off, fine. Parking also serves the purpose of creating some of the vibrant communities they want by providing access there, and it's a buffer that preserves pedestrians on the sidewalks. The point is, you take a traffic lane and you turn it into a dedicated bus lane. That's where all the drivers go. One bus contains as many people as 50 cars, right? It's a block's worth of cars. So don't remove the parking, remove a traffic lane, dig up the bus rapid transit plan that Rahm Emanuel put together and that no one had the balls to do. And I apologize, that was not the right word. And that's it.
great, thank you for that. Sorry, I wasn't trying to cut you off there. We do, all of your feedback was very helpful, and we'll document all of that down. We've got about 15 seconds. So I just wanted to thank everyone for participating. All of your feedback was very helpful. And we appreciate you participating in this process. So we will see you guys back in the main room here shortly.